Great. And welcome. I'm going to share my screen and just go over a few housekeeping things before we get started. How does that look, Bria? Is that the right view? Excellent. Okay, so for those of you tuning in tonight, I just want to welcome Chad for joining us first and foremost. Thank you all for tuning in. We are going to hear about the role of New Hampshire's lakes in bird migration. And as we were waiting, Chad mentioned that we are already starting to see fall migration, so I'm interested to learn more about that. Just a few quick housekeeping items. The session is being recorded, as you may have heard, so you can go back and watch it if you'd like, share it with friends. It will be on our website and our YouTube channel. We ask that you stay muted for the duration of the webinar, and we also ask that you keep your cameras turned off. That helps with any uh, background distractions. We've had some funny stories there in the past, and also helps with bandwidth when we have a lot of people joining us. You can submit questions into the chat box at any time during the presentation. We will share those with Chad and hopefully get to as many of them as possible. And after the webinar tonight, we're going to send you an email with an evaluation to let us know how we've done. Let us know if you have any other ideas for webinars you'd like to hear in the future. We share feedback with Chad as well if you have anything to say about the presentation. Just a quick reminder, if some of you are new to us, we're New Hampshire Lakes. We're a nonprofit organization that's the voice for all of New Hampshire's lakes, and our mission is to restore and preserve the health of New Hampshire's lakes. We have 3 programs: advocacy, conservation, and outreach. Lots going on. If any of those sound interesting to you, don't hesitate to reach out to us to learn more. And you can also support things like this free webinar that we are having tonight by becoming a supporter. Join a big community of people in New Hampshire that love our lakes. We're your hosts this evening. I'm Erin Mastine, the Outreach Manager, and Bria Arvidsson is joining us as well as our co-host, the Director of Programs here at New Hampshire Lakes. And our expert presenter this evening, Chad Witko, is an ornithologist and a founder of Birding University, which he'll tell us a little bit about tonight. And without further ado, I will now turn it over for the interesting part of this presentation.
Okay, thanks, Erin, for that. I'm going to share my screen, so bear with me. Okay, just
Excellent.
because things get a little screwy sometimes, you guys can see that, yes?
Looks great.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here, and thanks, Erin, for organizing this to have me in this evening. Uh, As you can see on the screen, and as was already mentioned, tonight's presentation is Lake Lifelines, the role of New Hampshire's lakes in bird migration. Just a note up front, this isn't so much a presentation on the birds of New Hampshire's lakes. You know, we're not going to go through all the different species per se, and their biology and ecology as they relate to lakes, but it's more about how lakes kind of fit into the full annual cycle of birds that are migratory, that rely on this region for part of their life cycle. So a little bit about tonight's agenda, just so we're clear up front with how we're going to go through this. We'll talk a little bit about myself and Birding University. At the top, this is just to kind of add some credentials to why I'm here, and hopefully you see the benefit of me giving this talk. We'll discuss the state of the birds, our birds, to see how they're doing. This will provide a broad context that I think is important as we go through. We'll discuss more about our migratory species, why it's important to understand, their biology, their ecology, and how, of course, New Hampshire's lakes fit into this. You know, what's the role of these lakes? We'll talk a little bit about how you can help our migratory species, both at home and as it relates to the lakes across the Granite State. And with as much time as we have, we'll do a little Q&A at the end. to answer all of your questions the best that I can. So a little bit about me as your presenter. So I am a lifelong birder. I've been birding since I mean, back when memories were first forming are all about birds, really, for me. So I've been doing this a long time. I'm originally from the Hudson Valley of New York, so I'm not a New England native. I did live in New England for a while, going to graduate school in New Hampshire, and then now I live in Vermont with my family. I've worked with birds in 7 states, coast to coast, and currently I serve as a specialist in avian biology for the National Audubon Society's Migratory Bird Initiative. So I've been working for Audubon and MBI for the last almost 7 years. For those that use eBird, any birders on the call, I am an eBird reviewer here in Vermont for Windham County. I also serve on the Vermont Bird Records Committee. I'm the founder of Antioch's Bird Club from Antioch University, New England. I am a science advisor for BirdNote for anyone that listens to that wonderful program. And I am the founder of Birding University. That's kind of putting this talk on tonight. So Aaron mentioned we'll talk a little bit about Birding University, and I'm just putting it up front just to get the boring stuff out of the way, and we'll get into the presentation in just a moment. So about Birding University. So Birding University is not an accredited university in the sense. It is rather a educational LLC, and it's something that I started along with two close friends who have New Hampshire ties as well, Stephen Lamond and Will Stolzheimer, both graduates of Antioch University, New England in the conservation biology program. All three of us have associations and ties to the Harris Center, uh, the education organization that's out of Hancock. So if anybody's familiar with the Harris Center, we've all have ties. Stephen, I think, is on the board for the Harris Center now. So we're the three folks that are putting on Birding University. So what is it? So it is an educational ecosystem that's helping birders of all backgrounds grow their skills in birding, conservation, and community. We truly believe that birding is for everyone. We're trying to remove all the barriers that get in the way for anyone to feel like they can get into this kind of field or hobby. We believe in curiosity over competition. We believe in stewardship over status. We're very inclusive, so we believe in inclusivity over gatekeeping. And of course, we have respect for all skill levels and personal identities. Now, right now, the majority of our work is coming through newsletters. So we have a free newsletter that I hope some of you will be encouraged to sign up for after tonight's call. Every week we have a free newsletter that goes out. I'll talk to you more about that. We cover a wide variety of topics, everything from foundational stuff, how to use binoculars, how to be more involved in your birding communities and conservation communities as it relates to conserving our birds, basic foundational stuff for learning how to be better at field ID. We cover a wide range of stuff, and it's beautifully put together through Substack, which is a great kind of platform for writing. But all of this, when you sign up, goes right to your email inbox. No trouble chasing it down. Our newsletter is filled with gorgeous photography, some of which, like these purple sandpipers, are photographs from myself or close friends. Will Stolzheimer, his brother, took this amazing photograph of blackbirds emerging from a roost in a tree. So there's wonderful imagery that goes along with it, as well as graphics that we put together to help you understand more about, bird identification or how to be a better field birder. So how does this kind of all come together in our newsletter? We have a weekly tier that we do for free. We do 1 to 2 newsletters per week. We have sections on This Week in Birding History, birding tips, and then deep dives that kind of go across these 4 foundational elements of bird ID, birding skills, community and conservation, and then birds and nature, which is more about our plant communities and some other ecological communities of birds. So you get that for free right in your inbox. We have a paid tier for $5 a month, basically the cost of a nice coffee. You get everything that's in the free tier. Plus, we're going to be launching some courses. We do quarterly courses that we're going to be doing that across the 3 months of the quarter will go from more beginner, intermediate to advanced levels. Everything from, in-depth ID like shorebird ID, waterfowl ID, to how to establish bird safe, spaces on your properties, how to maintain bird feeders, how to do bird photography, like some of the stuff that you've seen already. So we'll do rotating study series. We'll also have another newsletter that goes out that we have our fingers on the pulse of all the stuff that's happening in the birding community. So we're going to find all the best links and things to kind of jumpstart and fast track your learning. So all that for $5 a month plus the free stuff. And then we have a founding member tier for anyone that wants to join that for $100 a year. That is gets everything on the left, the free and the paid tiers, which of course over time builds up to more and more content you have access to. Then you have direct access to us. We do quarterly Q&As, and you can, of course, help shape our curriculum that we develop along the way, because really it's about, you guys. It's not about us. We feel pretty good about where we're at with birding and our skills, but we want to develop something that's good for everyone that wants to be a part of it. So that's kind of the quick nutshell of what we have right now. It's mostly, as I said, newsletter based, get it right into your inbox. Eventually, we're going to break out into cohorts and courses, webinars, such as this one. But this is some of the stuff that we offer. And then how to find us. We are on all the major social platforms. Substack is the main one. That's the orange icon here. But if you are on any of the other social media platforms, look us up. We have a lot of fun content that goes out. And then the QR code that you see here, anybody who wants to take a quick photo with their phone, this will take you to the Substack to sign up. And then if that doesn't work for you or it's too complicated, you can just email us at birdinguniversity@gmail.com. So that's a quick overview of kind of like what we bring. And I'm quite proud of what we've done so far. And I think if anybody's interested in birds and learning more and becoming a better birder or a conservation-minded birder, I think we have something to offer you. So feel free to look us up. Okay, so now that the plug's out of the way, we can kind of get into the start of our call. So we're going to start tonight with the state of our birds. This is going to be how are our birds, quote unquote, our birds doing? This will really give us the context to look into why it matters that we conserve them and why things like New Hampshire's lakes are a big part of that. So in 2019, there was a really seminal paper that came out, effectively kind of like, in the industry that I work in with bird conservation, we refer to it as the 3 billion birds gone paper. It detailed that since 1970, nearly 3 billion birds are no longer on the North American landscape, in the United States and Canada. So anybody that is older than, born in the 70s or lived through the 70s and 80s, you probably noticed that we live in a world with fewer birds, and it's absolutely true. If we were to take a population census, this is the number that's different between then and now. And so 3 billion birds have been lost within the last 50 years, which is a very humbling number to consider. This is 1 in 4 birds gone since 1970. So 1 out of every 4 individual birds is no longer on the landscape. And the distribution of that kind of disappearance is kind of disproportionate, unfortunately, with our migratory birds. So out of the 2.9, almost 3 billion, 2.5 billion are migratory species with a net loss of approximately 28%. Here on this graphic, you can see 2 and 5 Baltimore orioles, a very beloved species, often found around our lakes and wetlands, has been lost since 1970. So that is a very real thing that we have to consider when we think about birds, bird conservation, and what these birds are doing across our landscape. Now, that's not the only thing that's kind of come out to detail how our birds are doing. Every so often, there is the State of the Birds report that comes out. This is the latest one from this year, 2025. It kind of details since 1970, which has kind of become this hallmark number, this year that we kind of start from with a lot of this. we can see how our birds are doing long term since then, broken up into different taxonomic groups. And in doing so, I want to highlight some of these groups here that are often associated with water, right? We're talking about lakes tonight. So things like our ducks, our waterfowl, water birds. These are things like loons and herons and grebes. Sea ducks, which, you might not think utilize New Hampshire's lakes, but absolutely do in migration, and then our shorebirds. So you'll see that some of these are doing quite well, and duck populations are 24% higher than they were in 1970. This is a result of foundational policies that have been put in place to safeguard our wetlands. But that legacy is in jeopardy. As you can see here, we are seeing, even with these groups that are doing quite well, comparatively, that there are noticeable trends going downward for some of these species due to some of the habitat changes that's happening around the wetlands and the grasslands where some of these birds are breeding. So some birds are doing well, some of these wetland birds are not. Here's another kind of breakdown that comes from the State of the Birds report, just kind of showing how some of these birds are up or down long term. And that ring that you see just kind of details like the big number plus out of those species, how many are increasing, stable, or declining. Um, so all kind of going to, part of this big picture of how things are going. Now, this talk tonight is, of course, about New Hampshire's lakes. So we want to think about the aquatic stuff. Uh, but it's important to realize that our lakes aren't kind of in a vacuum of space, right? They're part of these larger matrices of habitats. And those matrices of habitats, even non-aquatic species, like our land birds, utilize our lakes for a lot of things. And so you can see here that some of the birds that are around, New England, New Hampshire area, eastern forest birds and grassland birds, these birds are declining at huge rates. And New Hampshire's lakes play a vital role in helping to make sure that those populations can remain viable. Now, one of the main threats to many of our birds, including our lake-associated birds, is climate change. Here's a map of common loon from Audubon's Survival by Degrees, which is kind of a report that came out detailing how a vast majority of North America's birds are at threat due to climate change, causing projected range shifts. So this is kind of, as you can see in the top right, this is the current warming scenario, thinking about how things are currently for the existing climate. This is effectively the range for common loon. Uh, and if we do a 1.5 degree Celsius warming scenario, we can start seeing some red creeping into this map in oranges. These represent a lost range due to climatic factors impacting, the habitats that these birds live in or things that they rely on. It's projected that these birds will shift their ranges to find the conditions that they need. So you can see with a 1.5 degree increase that these birds are moving out. Now, if we go to a 3 degree Celsius increase, which some models do predict, unfortunately, we see a 27% range loss in the red for a common loon. And what that effectively means is that this beloved species that we see in New Hampshire's lakes effectively is gone from the state. These birds would be going elsewhere, further north to breed. So while that's kind of sombering, I do have to point out that not all species that are associated with wetlands do see such declines in that way, or I should say range shifts. Uh, Here's great blue heron. Great blue heron actually doesn't really lose anything. In fact, they gain habitat up across, the subarctic areas in the boreal zone. For better or worse, they are impacted differently. Um, but coming back to it, a lot of our wetland birds would be impacted by climate change. And so this is yellow warbler. This is a species that is found tightly associated kind of with wet shrubby areas, often around our lakes. That is a bird that cheers up our spring in summers, and that bird would lose quite a bit of range, as would common merganser. And all of these are, of course, familiar migratory species. So when we talk about tonight's kind of topic of migratory birds and New Hampshire's lakes, just to kind of help build this foundation of getting us all in the same playing field, what are these migratory birds that we're talking about that rely on lakes? Well, they're pretty much all the species, like major groups that we can think of. We have of course, waterfowl like this red-breasted merganser, other ducks, swans, geese that rely on our lakes, water birds, common loon, green heron. Our shorebirds obviously rely on our lakes, but also raptors, right? Raptors are familiar sights around our lakes around the state, including things like osprey, bald eagle, and then even what we think of as traditional land birds. In this case, we have an eastern kingbird and a northern rough-winged swallow. These are birds that not only breed close to lakes, they need the habitat that is associated with lake edges at times, but they also forage around our lakes, eating insects. So basically, New Hampshire's lakes support a wide variety of birds, not just the ones that we see sitting on the water. And when we think about why they come through, our areas, like obviously some migratory species breed here and then leave, and others come through or come from further north. But birds are migrating because really it's about finding, going from areas of low or decreasing resources when things are changing to areas of increasing resources. Sometimes we think that birds are migrating to escape the cold. Yes, that is part of it. But even things like hummingbirds, they can survive, cold winter temperatures as long as there's unfrozen nectar out there, sometimes at feeders. So birds, yes, are escaping cold, but they're primarily looking for food and nesting resources. And of course, with our lakes and other wetlands, there is an open water component to this. So some species require open water to safely roost, get away from predators. Things like common loons, right? They need to take off from the water. And then, of course, foraging opportunities. And our migrants are, birds that have huge different migratory strategies. So when we think about the migratory birds that come through New Hampshire, we're looking at a whole host of different birds. Not all of these birds are New Hampshire birds that are listed here, but it's just to show that there's many different types of migration, from long and short distance migrants to what we think of as complete migrants. So these are birds that have a breeding range, and then when they migrate, they fully evacuate that breeding range and go outside of that to winter somewhere for the non-breeding season. Anyways, there's a whole different way that birds migrate, either diurnally during the day, at nighttime, and all of that kind of you know comes out in the wash because many of these birds do utilize lakes. So, we're talking about the decline of migratory birds. We're talking about how migratory birds, move and just broadly speaking, right? Broad brush strokes. But why? Why does it matter that we talk about our migratory birds when we think about resources such as New Hampshire's lakes? Well, our migratory birds, and all birds really, they tell us about the health of our environment. They're really the canaries in the coal mine. There's this old belief, right, that miners would take cage birds down, and if there was something wrong with the air quality in the mine, there's something would happen to the smaller bird in the cage first, indicating to the miners there's something wrong with the environment they're in. They need to evacuate. The same is true for birds. Birds respond rapidly to environmental change quite often. They're easy to study. They're often quite visible. We can identify individuals quite easily sometimes, not just like species, but actual individual birds. Species are often vocal. So they're easy to study and they tell us a lot about the environment. So they're really this perfect thing to kind of latch onto to understand how things are going, including around our wetland ecosystems. And we know that by protecting birds and their habitats, that we are also protecting the places that other wildlife and people need as well. So we know that if we do right by birds, we're going to be doing right by the planet and especially by us as well. So when we think about North America's avifauna or birds, there's about 1,100 species that have been documented in the U.S. And Canada, including Hawaii, which has a whole assemblage of other species that we don't have here on the main continent. And of the breeding species, about 800 or so, 70% of those are birds that migrate. Here's an awesome graphic that shows birds migrating on the night of October 16th and 17th. I don't know which year this was. This comes from Birdcast, but it shows millions of birds migrating that night, and these birds are being captured by radar. So we have a vast sense of how birds are moving, and we have hundreds and hundreds of species that are migrating through. And these birds, they're spending most of the year, over 50% of the time, off the breeding grounds. We do think of these as our birds, and there's a lot of great reasons to do so when it comes to stewardship. But really, many of these birds spend far more time outside the US and places like New Hampshire than they do elsewhere. So, these birds are truly global, if not hemispheric travelers. And what's really beautiful about it is that these birds are not only connecting, ecosystems and biophysical regions, they're connecting people and communities kind of across the globe. So they really are these wonderful little journeyers that go kind of throughout these broad, huge regions. And kind of getting towards the end here of kind of bird migration, it's important to kind of think that when we think about how a place like New Hampshire and its lakes fit into this, we want to think about how birds are moving across the landscape. So this is a traditional flyway map. This comes from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This might be familiar to some of you. We have four main flyways in North America. Interestingly enough, these flyways, when you start getting south of Mexico, really do fall apart. The flyway map here really isn't about the biological side of bird movement. I mean, to some degree, yes, birds are broadly moving north and south, and some birds stay within these. But you'll see that a lot of these boundaries are hard state lines based around kind of, these state boundaries. We know that birds don't really follow borders, instead, here we have a map that comes from Audubon's Bird Migration Explorer. This is a tool that I was one of the principal people in building. This is a very dynamic web tool. I highly recommend everybody check it out if you're interested in bird migration. Bird Migration Explorer. It's also available in Spanish, completely free on your browsers. And this map shows the tracks of thousands of birds across North America, kind of broadly color coded to different types of birds, like land birds or raptors, shorebirds. Um, these are birds that have tracking devices that have been put on them, and their tracks have been analyzed by researchers. And you can see very broadly that these birds, while some do fall within some of these uh, basic flyways, don't really fit that mold very well. Here is a more detailed up-close map of this, showing just water birds and waterfowl selected. And you can see that, birds coming out of Alaska, for instance, those birds are going across all four of our flyways. So migratory birds, as they're going through all of this, the main reason I'm showing this is to understand that these birds are crossing large distances, and they need really a kind of a patchwork quilt of healthy ecosystems along the way. And many species do rely on lakes, including those in New Hampshire. And I'll show a little bit more about the Bird Migration Explorer in a minute. I have a couple of slides that have some animations for tracked birds showing some movements through New England and New Hampshire. So what is the role of New Hampshire's lakes? I saw at the top of the call, I actually, despite living in New Hampshire for a little while, didn't know how many lakes there was. I saw a slide that said there's about 1,000 lakes in the state, so I'll go with that. But suffice to say, there's a wide swath of different lake types, lake sizes. These lakes are not all built the same. I mean, many of them are quite similar, I'm sure, in how they were created, obviously, but there's a wide variety of size and shape, and of course, many different birds utilize these in different ways. So it's really a great space to see this. So, here we have kind of a cross section of a lake. This is something that you would see kind of, from a textbook, perhaps. And just using this to show you, like, what do our lakes offer our migratory birds? Well, they, of course, offer nesting habitat. They offer shelter and protection from predators. We think about birds that roost out on water to avoid land-based predators. There are areas to rest and refuel. They provide foraging opportunities, obviously, not only for fish and other vertebrates like amphibians or small mammals along our shorelines, or even larger mammals. They also provide a lot of invertebrates that come in the form of terrestrial and aquatic creatures, and of course, fresh water, which all organisms need. These are just some of the things that lakes offer. And if we're to kind of like take this snapshot and kind of paste some birds onto here, we can kind of see just very quickly how our lakes in New Hampshire support a wide variety of our migratory birds. And, it's easy to look at things that, sit on the water surface like waterfowl or dive below like loons. But really, the whole ecosystem of our lake supports a wide myriad of species, whether it's orioles that are nesting in, tall trees that are adjacent to our lakes, or common yellowthroats that are found deep in kind of the emergent vegetation along our shorelines, or great blue herons hunting. The lakes offer a lot for a lot of species, including this cool gull in the top right. It says Bonaparte's gull. I'll highlight it again in a little bit. This is a bird that breeds up in the boreal forest of North America, and it's a tree nesting gull, which is really quite interesting. So, we have familiar species like this bald eagle, of course, but what does it look like in New Hampshire for our birds? How many birds exist here, and how do the lakes kind of come into this? So, there's about 405 species, something like that, if I'm remembering right, through eBird that have been documented in the state of New Hampshire. Here you can see kind of the county by county breakdown of how many species are observed in each of those. Most of them are about the same, 250 to 300. Rockingham County is kind of an anomaly. It's coastal, it goes out into the ocean, so there's a whole slew of other birds that come in. But there's hundreds of species that are found in the state, both as breeders and migrants. And many of these birds are kind of coming into this. So, oops, sorry. And then I just want to say here, this species stuff on the right, this comes from the Bird Migration Explorer. And you can see here, this is a selection of species that comes in. This is a location for Laconia. I selected Laconia. So 172 migratory species come in. And I'll try to pull up a live demo kind of towards the end of the Explorer so we can see a little bit more of this. Uh, I think you'll really find some of the movements interesting. But we don't just need our tracked species to really understand how birds are migrating through. We can look at just our observations and have a good sense of what's happening with our migratory birds. So here, I did a quick look through eBird, and you can see based on different counties, like some of these amazing totals of migratory birds that are using some of our lakes. So things like scoters, and I'll show you some of this on the Explorer. These are species that are breeding in high parts of North America, and then, they winter and spend their non-breeding season on the ocean. And they're utilizing New Hampshire's lakes as they're coming through. Redneck phalarope, this is a cool shorebird, kind of between the size of a sparrow and a robin, maybe. And that's a bird that only overwinters far out on the ocean, and yet these birds are using our lakes when they're coming through. And even our land birds, look at Cheshire County, Spofford Lake, which is an amazing place to look for rare birds in the region. Over 2,000 tree swallows have been observed here in a single session in April a couple years ago during migration. And those are birds that, they're not utilizing the lake, that many of them, to breed, but they're coming through and they're foraging over the lake with the resources the lake has. Here's a few more. Horned grebes, 300 on Moore Reservoir. And then Sullivan County, a really fun one with 300 Bonaparte gulls. Again, these are these boreal nesting gulls, as well as one little gull, which is a super rare bird for the region. It's a bird that's primarily found in parts of Europe and other parts of the world, with only a few previous colonies breeding in North America, which we don't really have a sense of yet. Many people think it's maybe near James Bay. There might be some, or along some of the Great Lakes. But there was one individual with these Bonaparte skull, this Bonaparte skull flock on Lake Sunapee, which is a great lake as well. And here you can see that beautiful little gull here, the world's smallest gull with its kind of dark underwings and pink blush. So our lakes can host a wide variety of migratory birds that are common and unfamiliar. And again, I'll show you a little bit more about the Bird Migration Explorer towards the end of the call. I'll do a screen share there. So how can you help our birds? It's really important to think about how under such duress that these birds are experiencing, the challenges they're experiencing, how we can help these amazing migratory species. And the first thing I want to say is, support the organizations that are doing the work. It's no surprise to say this, right? But there's a lot of cuts happening across the federal space. So organizations like many of the nonprofits here, they need as much support as we can, whether it's with donations or it's with, time and volunteering. So supporting those doing the work, it's always the first best step that I think we can do. And then, if you want to work on a more local level, thinking about conservation commissions, thinking about organizations like New Hampshire Lakes, doing that support wherever you can is always going to be helpful. At home, there's 7 simple actions that Cornell and many across the space say is important. All of these here, if you can work through these, will help improve, the world for birds. Everything from making our windows safer. Billions of birds run into windows every year, whether they be giant skyscrapers in major metropolitan areas or they run into homes. Treating our windows is important. Keeping cats indoors. I know this is a touchy subject for some because many people do keep cats outside, but cats do, science shows they kill billions of birds every year. They've been known to create extinction events for species in places where cats aren't native. So it's really important to consider keeping cats and other pets safe inside when possible. It's better for the animals as well. And then things like native plants, avoiding pesticides, thinking about pesticides and our waterways, like that's especially important, as well as plastic use. So this is just some very simple things that we can do if we want to be more conscious about the birds that we care about. So in addition to some of those, we have here just some threats to a familiar species here, common loon across some of our lakes. Obviously, human disturbance. I saw some pictures at the start of the talk tonight, of people enjoying New Hampshire's lakes, whether it's, swimming or diving or boating. And all those are important, right? We all enjoy our lakes for a lot of reasons that are important to us and are healthy for us. But we want to minimize disturbance when possible. That's really important for things like loons, not getting too close. Uh, Unfortunately, our presence in and around lakes can facilitate kind of more numbers or more comfort from certain species like skunks and raccoons. These things are known predators of things like loons, adults, and eggs. So we want to be careful about leaving trash out or anything that might attract some of these mesopredators to the areas where loons might be. I grew up fishing. I used to love fishing, and I've seen it firsthand as an adult as well, how fishing line and gear can impact birds, everything from loons to gulls to ducks. So if you're an avid fisherman, please clean up after yourself. It'll go a long way. Climate change is a big threat to loons, as we showed earlier. Water levels, this impacts obviously how birds like loons are utilizing lakes and breeding. And then shoreline development, which I'll talk a little bit more of towards the end of the call. And then there's another familiar bird that I think was on Aaron's kind of title slide for tonight. This is a great blue heron. I didn't list climate change as a threat to the species, as you saw, like they actually do kind of quite well with it. But like common loons, human disturbance is an issue. Contaminants is a known issue. I mean, we think about, some of those other species like ospreys and bald eagles, other raptors. We think about pest or, chemicals and DDT and things that kind of persisted on the landscape and bioaccumulated through food chains. So, we want to be careful about contaminants and then habitat management. Great Great blue herons obviously are kind of along this interface between, lakes and wetlands and terrestrial zones. And then when they nest, they need these large trees that are left to stand where they have their rookeries, right? So they need trees that are basically naturally dead or dying that give them these large platforms safe up in the air from most predators. Great horned owls are notwithstanding, but so when we think about our lakes, besides the things that we talked about with the 7 things we can do at home, we looked at some of the threats that 2 common species face. But here's kind of 6 main buckets that I think are really important to think about, where we can do better for our migratory species. The first is clean water. I mean, that should be kind of very self-evident for all the reasons that clean water is important for healthy birds and ecosystems and communities of people. Uh, Also, we want to think about invasive plants. So invasive plants mean both terrestrial and aquatic. And birds are pretty good at adapting in the short term, but not always. And sometimes invasive plants can kind of choke out or outcompete some of the plants or systems that they need. And so, if we're boaters, we want to think about not spreading invasive plants through our activities there. This can be a big one for certain species, and it's why, you know, decades ago, you might hear birders say, "Oh, I used to see these types of ducks on this body of water, and I don't see them anymore." And a lot of times it's because invasive plants or invasive animals have come in and changed kind of the underwater uh, habitats that you can't see, but the birds know isn't for them, and then they move on. Healthy fish populations, obviously, for our fish-eating species, everything from the raptors we've talked about several times, and herons, the diving ducks, the diving loons, water birds, also things like kingfishers. Everything from kind of small forage fish to larger fish is really important. And then fish also, when there's healthy populations, can help shape these ecosystems in other ways that are good for birds. So maintaining healthy fish populations where we can. We want to maintain a healthy matrix of habitats around our lakes. Our lakes, as I said at the top of the call, aren't in a vacuum. They often are in this nested matrix of other habitats, whether it's forest or grasslands, different forest types, of course. And, we think about forest birds, and yes, there are some birds that really utilize heavy forested habitats, but those species also, after the breeding season, they'll migrate through and they'll use those forests or those shrubby areas that are adjacent to lakes when they're, fueling up for their migrations. There's a lot of insect life there. So having a healthy matrix of habitats around for them to not only raise young, molt their feathers, which is also quite intensive, and then to get ready for migration. So healthy habitats around our lakes is just as important as the lakes themselves. We want to maintain our shoreline habitat as naturally as possible. It's very common to go to some of our lakes and just see developed shoreline all the way around. Having natural habitat along the shoreline is really good for all the obvious reasons about, providing habitat for birds that, some birds nest in habitat like you see here, others forage in it. Um, and it also hosts some species that you wouldn't see otherwise. Birds that are kind of in that transitional zone between kind of terrestrial and aquatic. So maintaining good shoreline habitat is key. And then any adjacent wetlands, right? Adjacent wetlands ties into a lot of this that you see here. Wetlands are often kind of the spawning ground for healthy fish populations, if they're tied to larger systems. Wetlands host a whole variety of other species. I could see coming to a wetland like this and seeing birds like red-winged blackbird, common yellowthroat, swamp sparrow, warbling vireo. A whole host of birds utilize these wetlands that don't utilize kind of the open lakes that we might envision when we think about our lakes. So all of these things are really great things to think about when we want to protect our birds. Um, we're just about to the Q&A, but I want to take a second, if it's okay, to go off, this slide and then show the Bird Migration Explorer, which I think will be good. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you for your patience. All right, I'll share my screen again. All right, can you see? Can I get a thumbs up, Aaron? Can you see the browser? Yep, okay. So if we go to the Bird Migration Explorer, again, this is the tool that I was showing at the top of the call. Uh, this is just this fantastic thing that Audubon, along with these 10 founding partners at the bottom, have put together. Um, it's interactive, so if I click this, I can load this interactive map. And for those of you that are interested in birds and specifically any type of birds, like we think about water birds or waterfowl, we can do these amazing deep dives here for over 450 species. Um, all these are tracks that go across of different species, so you can click on any of these tracks of a bird that's been tracked, and you can go in, dive deep. But I want to show you that there's three main types of maps that you guys can look at when you think about your lakes. So you can look at bird species, you can look at locations, and you can look at conservation challenges. And so I'll quickly show you a little bit of each. So if you want to look up bird species, we can go here. You can filter it down. It kind of automatically goes to your location now. But we can look at osprey. So this is a dynamic map with, 380 individual ospreys that are migrating throughout the Americas. And so each of these yellow orbs, these dots, is a osprey that's been tracked. And you can see that these birds are migrating from portions of North America into the Caribbean, into parts of Central America and South America. And if we zoom in, again, I said this is dynamic, we can see New Hampshire here. And as the map comes through, we can start seeing birds migrating north. Uh, and you can see the brown dots are relative abundance. These are all from eBird checklists. So if you submit eBird data, that comes here. And then the yellow dots are individual birds. Now, it may look like a lot of stuff just zipping around, but I want to show you that you can absolutely take this at your own pace. You can pause it. You can pan it as slowly as you want. But you can see that this is a species, right, that has broad migration strategies across the Americas. It's moving throughout a wide portion of that hemisphere. And it's a bird that is closely tied to New Hampshire's lakes. So we can see, as these birds are coming into New Hampshire or going to other places, that they're likely utilizing these systems, which helps kind of showcase the value of those systems to that bird. I'll show you one more. We mentioned black scoter and other scoters. So this is a sea duck. As I said, this is a bird that breeds in the high Arctic, as well as parts around the subarctic around Hudson Bay. And you can see this bird migrating to our Atlantic coast, but then migrating through portions of New England. And so it's not uncommon during migration to see this species on New Hampshire's lakes, as well as its coast, obviously along Rockingham County. So you can explore on this tool, the birds that matter to you. You can explore different areas using the locations tool. So we can look up, again, I said Laconia. And then you can see through banding data, through tracking data, how Laconia connects throughout the hemisphere. So the more purple a hexagon is, the more tagged birds connect that place to Laconia in this example. So you can see Laconia has connections all the way up to the north slope of Alaska, the highest reaches of the Arctic and Greenland, all the way down to the Falkland Islands. And so you can connect places. You can see how many species connect those places, which species connect those places. And this is a really great way to think about the stewardship of where you live, the stewardship of our lakes. You can see these birds that are coming through your region. And then the final thing I'll just show are our conservation challenges, which is a great way to look into some of the threats or conservation opportunities that impact our birds. Obviously, we could look at things like surface water management, pollution, all these things that kind of come into play, flooding that might impact our lakes as well. And it gives you a whole list of birds and spatially shows you how these things play out. So that's just a great tool that I kind of highlighted in a few portions of tonight's call, but felt it was worthwhile to at least show you a little bit more. And of course, I could talk about that tool for hours and hours and hours. So if anybody has questions, let me know. But I see we're at time, I think, for Q&A. I know that was a kind of a fire hose of information across broad brushstrokes of birds and lakes, and but hopefully was, a worthwhile journey for everyone here.
Yeah, wow, that was excellent, Chad. Thank you so much. So many cool resources that I know I'll be checking out. So I really love seeing all those different things that you showed us. And we'll see if anybody types any questions in here as we close up for this evening. If anybody has questions, feel free to type those into the chat box. And if for some reason you can't think of anything right now, but something comes to you further down the line, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to us at New Hampshire Lakes if you have specific questions to our lakes. And Chad, you shared your um, email there earlier on one of those slides.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat as well.
Excellent. And as a reminder, we do share the recordings. You can go back and check on that. And I think, Chad, you said you were going to share some of the slides from this evening as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I emailed you a
Oh,
PDF,
perfect.
so hopefully you have that.
Yeah, so
Um,
we'll get that up on the website as well. So if you just wanted to go back and look at the slides for some of the resources, those will be as available also.
yeah, and I want to say, I can fill the space with a few things, but one thing we had talked about, you'd mentioned at the top of the call, is this idea, right, that we're in summer, but fall migration's already started. And interestingly enough, it's some of our water associated birds that are on the move right now, and things like shorebirds primarily. Um, our shorebirds start moving as early as late July. So we think of fall migrations being this classical cold weather October thing, uh, but really some of our birds, based on their biological life histories, some of these birds are up in the Arctic. They either don't get that far to breed or they have failed nests. They're not going to invest the time to kind of try again in such a short breeding window, so they'll migrate out early. Others, just linger around, but shorebirds are coming through. So, these are birds we can see now around our lakes, our lake edges, our mud flats. Um, yes, birdmigrationexplorer.org. Um, yeah, so some birds are moving right now.
Sorry, this is my own question.
Sure.
Um,
Of course.
we love our hummingbirds here at my house and we put feeders out. And I typically know like when to expect them arriving and when they kind of start leaving, but do you have any more specific dates for that particular species in New Hampshire?
Yeah, so in New Hampshire, the ruby-throated hummingbird is the primary species that we have. They're the only bird, the only hummingbird that really breeds kind of like east of the Mississippi. When you start getting out west, there's a larger group of hummingbirds that breed in places like the arid Southwest, along the Pacific coast up into Alaska. Other species have shown up in New Hampshire as vagrants, but ruby-throated is our R1 breeding hummingbird species. They typically show up right around like May 1st. It kind of depends a little before, a little after, but around May 1st is when you start seeing people talking about seeing hummers at their flowers or their feeders if they got them up. And when they leave, it kind of starts going. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat. So when they leave, it kind of depends a little bit on the age and sex of the bird. So for ruby-throated hummingbirds, the males do absolutely nothing when it comes to the breeding stuff. They don't help with the nest. They don't help raise the young. So male ruby-throated hummingbirds are often the first to leave. Those are then typically followed by, the females and the first year birds. So they kind of stage themselves by age and sex. And we're kind of like getting into like the peak ruby-throated hummingbird migration now, like end of August and through mid-September for where we live and this part of New England, Vermont, where I am, New Hampshire, uh, that's the time of year that those birds are really coming through. So definitely keep your feeders up. And then I always suggest that people keep their feeders up, later into the fall in case there's any lingering birds that come through, that you can give them some nourishment along the way. It will absolutely not change their migration needs. They won't stay when they're not supposed to. They'll utilize it as they would any other resource and continue on. The only thing that you need to do is just make sure you keep it clean. So make sure you clean your hummingbird feeders. There's tons of resources out there for that. So
Yeah, good tip there with keeping them out a little longer. I never thought of that, but obviously makes sense. Someone did, yeah, Bria, thank you for following up with this question about the invasive
hmm.
species to address for the lakes. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
if you have anything to say on that, Chad.
Sure. I mean, I would say that I might defer to some of you guys for some of the aquatic stuff. I'm sure you can think of, I don't know, hopefully not too many species, but I'm sure there's a number of species that come to top of mind, that, are kind of changing the landscape underwater, the lakescape, I guess. Um, but yeah, along our shorelines, there's a lot of invasive plants that we think about that can be problematic. Everything from like glossy buckthorn to bittersweet, things that just kind of outcompete a lot of other species. Their fruits don't really provide the same nourishment as they would for other, native plants that birds might forage on. So it can kind of be like an energy sink in some case for these birds. They're eating on stuff that's not as nourishing as some of the native plants. There's a lot of debate about this, and it's true that sometimes invasive plants can provide structure. When we think about how birds need certain environmental structures and how the forests are laid out, they can provide nesting habitats. We see birds nesting in invasive plants all the time. When we see things like mockingbirds and multiflora rose and all that. So it's a it's a challenging thing to figure out like where it best lies to go, but it's safe to say that invasives and non-natives will always do worse for birds than natives if we can. So broad brushstrokes, I
Yeah,
know.
go
So
ahead, Bria. I'm
maybe
sure you have something to say.
so maybe the aim would be instead of going in and removing all of the invasives, looking for a diverse shoreline. If they're if they're going to continue to combat invasives, maybe not just go after one, but try to knock back as many as possible, but also maintain their diverse native shoreline.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. That with a lot of invasive species, it's easy to kind of get these like monocultures where something just takes over. So it does remove kind of that structure where we have kind of a more diverse community. And so it's like something I do at home. There's on that slide about things you can do at home. One of the things was planting native plants, but also removing invasives. And it's something that I am constantly on the lookout for here at our house, and it's a losing battle sometimes, but you gotta put in the good work if you want to make a change.
Absolutely. And
I've
Rhonda,
got
I'm not sure
oh
if that addressed your question about invasives in our lakes, but we have had many webinars about aquatic invasive species. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you could find one of those previous webinars that address more specifically invasive species in the water. So take a look there for it. We'll see, we're just about here at 8 o'clock. If there are any other questions or any closing remarks, Chad, that you want to say before we go.
Well, again, just to thank everyone for first of all having me, and then of course everybody for joining tonight's call. I hope it was informative and felt like it was worth your time. I know we're all super busy in life, but it's really kind of rewarding and uplifting to see people joining these calls because it's clear people care about our environment, in this case, New Hampshire's lakes, and so that's just super super great to see. And yeah, just a final plug for Birding University. Again, we have a lot of great free content that comes out week after week after week after week. And if you're interested in learning more about birds and being an inclusive member of a growing community, by all means, please look us up and we'll be sure to help you out.
Absolutely. Yeah, to piggyback on that, thank you all for tuning in tonight. And Chad, that was an excellent presentation. So thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Have a great night, everybody.